Hey guys, tonight we drift into a valley where the hills are heavy with vines, and the air smells like wood smoke, crushed grapes, and a hint of garlic that's been slow roasting for hours. You've just stepped into the Georgian countryside during harvest season, and trust me, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because one toast turns into 10, and suddenly you're halfway through a song you don't know, holding a ladle full of wine while someone's grandmother feeds you something suspiciously jiggly from a clay pot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just as the sun starts to droop over the Alazani Valley in eastern Georgia. The light turns gold, then honey, then a strange velvet purple that makes the grapevines shimmer like old chandeliers. There's a woman hanging laundry between two walnut trees, and a rooster who's still convinced it's morning. You, meanwhile, are standing in a courtyard cluttered with plastic chairs, heavy wooden tables, and buckets of grapes that look like they've been stolen from a Renaissance still life. The family greets you like you've returned from war. There are hugs, cheek kisses, and at least one enthusiastic uncle already halfway into his third toast. Welcome, guest, someone says, which here is less a greeting and more a spiritual assignment. You will be fed. You will drink. You will be toasted at, loudly. Resistance is futile. Kakheti isn't Georgia's only wine region, but it's arguably its most famous, and certainly the loudest during Artveli, the harvest season. This is not a quiet affair. Chickens scatter underfoot, children steal grapes by the handful, and somewhere, a radio blasts polyphonic folk songs through cracked speakers. It's the kind of evening where time starts to melt. You're guided to a table sagging under the weight of pakali, kinkali, fried trout, cornmeal, machete, and badrijani nigvzit. Eggplant rolls so thin and slick they practically slide down your throat. And then comes the wine, not in elegant glasses, but in earthen bowls or recycled Fanta bottles, each with its own scribbled label that might say 2019 Red or just Uncle Bika's Hope. You think you're just sitting down for dinner, but no, you've entered a supra, a traditional Georgian feast. And this isn't a meal. It's a multi-hour, wine-soaked ceremony where speeches are made, songs are sung, and your stomach is gently destroyed with love. Someone introduces the tamada, the toastmaster. He's thin as a vine stalk and wears a jacket that might have seen both weddings and funerals. His job? To guide the evening's toasts, weaving memory, family, and fermented philosophy into a slow, winding narrative. He lifts his glass, more of a chalice really, and says something like, "To ancestors who tilled this soil barefoot, and to the ones we carry in our hearts tonight." You nod, you drink, you think that was beautiful. You also realize you don't know how many more of these toasts there will be. Spoiler, infinite. In between toasts, someone hands you a small plate of church kela, those sausage-shaped strings of nuts dipped in thickened grape juice and hung to dry like medieval candy. You chew politely. It tastes like a chewy trail mix wearing a silk robe. You smile. Very good, you lie. A grandmother laughs and mutters something in Georgian that you're pretty sure translates to, "He has no idea what he's doing." The stars are starting to spill across the sky now, and the courtyard flickers with candles, citronella coils, and the occasional phone flashlight. A dog curls up beneath your bench. The rooster, confused and probably drunk, crows again. You're full, but they don't care. The food keeps coming. Stewed beans, pickled jonholi, a word you can't say even sober, fried potatoes with dill, and roasted pork so tender it could legally be considered a liquid. Someone throws an accordion into the mix. You clap, unsure whether this is for rhythm or for survival. Scientists still argue whether the unique microbial culture in Georgian clay wine vessels, the kvevari, contributes more to flavor or folklore. But tonight, you're convinced it's both. The wine tastes like the sun, and the soil had a baby during a thunderstorm. Someone recites a poem. Another person responds with a half-sung ballad about love and apricots. The tamata toasts again. You have no idea what for. You drink anyway. And through it all, the grapes sit quietly in their buckets, waiting to be pressed tomorrow. Some look soft already, like they're eavesdropping on the feast and starting to weep. You lean back, dizzy in that good way, blinking at a sky so clear it looks fake. Somewhere behind you, someone uncorks a new bottle, and a child sleepily steals another grape. This is not dinner. This is seasonal religion. And you've just taken your first sip. The thing about wine country is that it never just begins with wine. The vines themselves are only the show ponies. What really matters is the ground beneath them, that moody, ancient earth that shifts from limestone to slate to volcanic rubble before you've even walked a mile. Georgia's grape-growing valleys are a geological buffet. And tonight, we're digging in with both feet. You're still in Kakheti, where the Alazani River snakes lazily between the Caucasus Mountains and the Gomberi Range, hemming in a valley so fertile it could probably grow dreams. It's not flat here, though your brain might try to flatten it into one long postcard of vineyards. The terrain rolls, humps, juts, and dips, shaped by millennia of tectonic mood swings. Volcanic soil is the region's secret spice. Rich in minerals and a bit unpredictable, it gives the grapes that elusive something sommeliers call character, and locals just shrug off as how it's always tasted. You walk past rows of saperavi vines, deep blue-black grapes used to make robust reds, and pause at a patch where the soil crumbles under your foot like black cake. It smells like metal, moss, and ash. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor coughs into life. You bend down and grab a handful. It's gritty, fine, almost magnetic. Scientists still argue whether the iron-rich volcanic soil enhances tannins or just stresses the vines enough to make them interesting. Either way, the result is wine that doesn't whisper. It hums. A few kilometers west, things change fast. The vineyards near Talavi are planted on limestone and clay, the kind of ground that holds water like a grudge. The wines here are softer, rounder, like they've had therapy. Then, cross a ridge, and suddenly it's sandy soil, dotted with quartz and flint, and the grapes grown there taste like they've seen things. One winemaker calls it sun trauma. As you walk, you begin to notice how nothing here grows alone. Vines are tangled around walnut trees. Persimmons lean into the edge of cornfields. Bees drift lazily between lavender patches, planted not for romance, but pest control. Even the air feels like it's been blended by a chef. Equal parts hay, crushed leaf, wood smoke, and something sugary you can't quite name. There's an old man sitting on an overturned bucket, trimming his vines with a knife so worn it's basically an heirloom. You wave. He waves back. He says something that includes the word shala, which might mean wet mud, or you're walking through the good stuff. You're not sure. Either way, he gestures to a crooked sign nailed to a tree that reads 2007, sweet like first kiss. The Georgian word for vineyard is vadzi, and unlike the sleek, sanitized wineries you may know, most vadzi here look like they've been built from whatever happened to be nearby. Stone walls from demolished monasteries, rusted tractor parts repurposed into gates. One even has a door made from what suspiciously looks like the side of a Soviet refrigerator. And still, the grapes grow. Georgia has over 500 indigenous grape varieties, though only about 30 are used commercially. This makes it one of the richest viticultural gene pools in the world. You don't need to remember the names: Rkatsitali, Metzvain, Alexandruli. But you should know this. Some of these grapes only grow on 2 hillsides in one village, guarded by old women with fierce opinions and goats. You pass a small shrine made of stacked stones and broken tiles. Inside it, a faded icon of a saint holding grapes instead of the usual sword or scroll. The plaque reads something like, "Saint Nino, give us a kind harvest and no hail." You squint at the sky. It's clear now, but in Georgia, a clear sky is more a flirtation than a promise. Speaking of promises, some farmers here still practice biodynamic winemaking, which means they plant, they prune, and harvest according to lunar phases, solar flares, and the occasional whisper from the neighbor's dreams. One vineyard even times fermentation to folk songs, claiming the vibrations encourage good yeast behavior. Scientists still argue whether this is spiritual alchemy or just extremely poetic plumbing. You stop by a cuvivre pit, an earthen hole where giant clay vessels are buried for fermenting wine in traditional style. The cuvivres look like upside-down beehives with the texture of old terracotta roof tiles. They're lined with beeswax and often blessed before the first pour. Fun fact, the largest known cuvivre was the size of a compact car and once held nearly 5,000 liters of wine. That's either a record or a very bad idea. As you walk back toward the village, you notice that the vineyards aren't fenced off. No barbed wire, no security cameras, just open rows inviting birds, animals, and overly curious guests like you. It's trust, or maybe stubbornness, probably both. The sun is lower now, gilding the vines and casting long shadows across the valley floor. You hear someone calling your name, well, a version of your name, as a boy runs toward you with purple-stained fingers and a piece of tonas puri, the traditional clay oven bread that tastes like it came from a parallel universe where gluten is a blessing. You take the bread, you take a grape, you let the dirt cling to your shoes a little longer. This isn't just land, it's language, belief, stubborn history, and at least 3 kinds of mold. And the feast hasn't even properly started yet. Somewhere between your 3rd helping of walnut paste and the 2nd toast you forgot to drink to, it hits you. These grapes are old, not just wrinkled on the vine old, but ancient, as in the birth of metal tools ancient. You're not just in a wine region, you're in the cradle. The archaeological, ferment-scented cradle of wine itself. Right now, you're walking the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains, in the shadow of ruins that predate most countries and possibly indoor plumbing. A shallow cave near Shulaveri has yielded grape seeds dated to over 8,000 years ago. A fact that no one here brings up casually. They save it for special occasions, like arguing with French tourists. The Neolithic people who lived here didn't have pottery wheels or Instagram, but they had wild vines, steady hands, and apparently a serious crush on fermentation. They invented the kvevré, those now iconic buried clay vessels that look like giant teardrops. Scientists still argue whether the original kvevrés were used more for storing wine or fermenting bread beer. Either way, Georgia clings to the belief, backed by a suspiciously gleeful number of labs, that it is the first wine-producing country on Earth. You duck into a small family cellar outside of Signagi. The walls sweat history. Rows of buried kvevrés breathe cool vapor into the room like ancient snorkels. A chalkboard lists what's currently fermenting. Rkatsiteli 2024, Saperavi 2023, last year's miracle. You're handed a shallow scoop carved from an animal horn and offered a cloudy white wine that smells like honey-drenched apples and barn hay. You sip. It tastes like the inside of a beehive on a warm afternoon, chaotic but oddly reassuring. Your host, an older man with eyebrows like grapevines, points to a narrow wooden shelf stacked with yellowing documents. Soviet certificates, he says. Back then, we made leaders, not joy. He pours himself a glass and mutters something about bureaucracy. You nod solemnly, despite understanding only every third word. Wine, as it turns out, is also a language. Outside the cellar, the sun plays tricks through the vines. You swear the grapes are vibrating. A dog walks by with a cluster of them in its mouth. You wonder if that counts as vintage theft. The villagers here talk about wine like it's a person. Moody, generous, sometimes cruel, always family. The Saperavi grape, they say, likes to sleep in wet soil, while Rkatsiteli is the first to fight the frost. Some believe that the kvevré itself has a personality, absorbing stories over time, like an aging monk with wine breath and too many opinions. You hear about an especially old kvevré in a nearby monastery. It's cracked down one side and patched with beeswax and an old coin. Every year, it leaks exactly 1 cup of wine, always on the same day. The monks call it the saint's share. Whether it's a miracle or a moisture problem, no one's quite sure. As the afternoon leans into evening, you pass by rows of Sitska vines, an Imeretian white variety with a zesty zing and the personality of a caffeinated lemon. Your guide says it was once favored by 10 the century kings and 21 Saint Century bartenders alike. You make a mental note to remember that. You immediately forget. There's something hypnotic about watching grape harvesters at work. They move with the rhythm of people who've done this every year since before their knees started complaining. A man sings a half-remembered folk song about a jealous river that tried to drown a vineyard. A teenager swats at bees with his hat while balancing a plastic tub full of grapes on his shoulder. A woman pauses mid-snip to squint at you and mutter, "City?" You nod. She laughs kindly, like she already knows your back's going to hurt tomorrow. Fun fact, the juice from red grapes isn't red, it's clear. The color of red wine comes from grape skins steeped during fermentation, a process Georgian winemakers mastered so long ago they probably didn't even call it a process. They just called it Tuesday. Somewhere in the middle of the vineyard, you come across a vine that isn't in any guidebook. The grapes are tiny, nearly black, and covered in a dusty bloom that makes them look like they've been powdered by ghosts. Your guide calls them ojaleshi, a rare mountain variety that's notoriously hard to cultivate but adored by wine eccentrics. These grapes, he whispers, are like jazz. You don't get them, you feel them. You try one. It tastes like blackberry jam, with a twist of sass and a hint of argument. You nod like you understand. You mostly don't. As the sun dips low, workers begin collecting their tools, chatting in a lazy mix of Georgian, Russian, and gestures. Someone turns on a small speaker, and traditional panduri music drifts across the vines. The kind of melody that sounds like it's been weeping for centuries, but still gets up every morning to prune the hedges. You're invited to press a few grapes. You roll up your sleeves. You step into a wooden trough and begin to stomp, like some grape-stained toddler in an adult body. It's sticky, slippery, and strangely emotional. The juice trickles around your toes. Your host laughs. Congratulations, you have baptized your feet. You stand there, grape pulp between your toes, twilight slipping over the hills like silk, and think, this is absurd. This is ancient. This is oddly perfect. The wine isn't just aged here. It's inherited. You're not quite sure when the feasting began, only that you've somehow arrived at a table groaning under the weight of food, surrounded by people you didn't meet earlier, but who now call you Megobari, friend, with the force of a declaration. Your glass is never empty, your plate never bare, and your personal space has been thoroughly breached by the warmth of roasted lamb, garlic, and 20 overlapping toasts. This is the supra, not just dinner, but a full-blown social architecture with rules, roles, and rhythms that predate traffic lights and personal boundaries. If the vineyard is the heart of Georgian culture, the supra is the soul, and tonight that soul has invited you in, dressed you in a metaphorical embroidered vest, and placed you squarely between a man who eats only pickled things and a woman who insists you haven't tried her pakali correctly. You attempt to pace yourself. You do not succeed. The first toast comes from the tamada, who lifts his horn-shaped cup and begins in Georgian, a poetic blend of history, faith, and an oddly specific story about his grandfather, surviving a flood with nothing but a bottle of rakatsitli and an angry goose. You don't catch every word, but the intent is clear. Honor the dead, celebrate the living, respect the vine. Everyone drinks. You drink. Then the second toast, to peace. You nod solemnly. Third toast, to mothers. Applause. Fourth, to those far away. Fifth, to new friends. By the sixth toast, something about goats and perseverance, you've lost track of the number and the general direction of the conversation. Toasts here are less like speech and more like waves. You ride them, let them crash, and occasionally come up gasping for a slice of bread. Every table surface is covered. There's lobio, spiced kidney beans baked in clay pots, beside grilled eggplant stuffed with garlicky walnut paste. A pile of kinkali, those doughy soup dumplings, forms a doughy mountain in the center. You're told to pick them up by the stem. Bite a small hole, slurp the broth, and then eat. You do your best. It goes badly. Juice drips down your chin, and the pickled things man claps for you. You've been initiated. Between toasts, plates are passed like holy offerings. Someone explains chakopuli, a lamb stew with tarragon and white wine that tastes like spring if it had a bit more attitude. There's fried cornbread, slabs of salty sulguni cheese, and baskets of fresh bread that vanish seconds after they're refilled. A child runs by with a grape stuck in his nose. An uncle stands to toast and knocks over a bowl of pomegranate seeds. No one panics. This is part of it. The chaos, the warmth, the feeling that this might be the last feast of your life, and you wouldn't mind. You learn quickly that the tamata is the gravity of the supra. No one speaks between his toasts unless invited. Even when he's not talking, his eyebrows do most of the heavy lifting. He controls the flow of the evening like a conductor, deciding who to honor, who to tease, and when to shift the mood from reverent to ridiculous. Scientists still argue whether the supra evolved from religious rituals or pagan harvest festivals, but tonight it feels like both. There's a rhythm: toast, eat, sing, toast, drink, sigh, toast, eat again. Time slows. Your fork becomes a compass. Your wine glass becomes a portal. Someone raises a toast to love. Someone else counters with a toast to endurance. A third insists on toasting the village dog who once chased away a wolf. There are no winners, only increasingly red faces and hearts so full they might burst. At some point, a plastic bottle of cha-cha appears. It looks innocent, like a repurposed mineral water container, but do not be fooled. Cha-cha is Georgian pomace brandy, distilled from grape skins, stems, and dreams of invincibility. It tastes like a lightning bolt disguised as moonshine. You are offered a shot. You accept. You regret. You recover. You are offered another. As the night folds into itself, voices grow louder, then softer. A woman sings something unaccompanied, her voice raw, trembling, the notes hanging in the night like dew. The table goes quiet. Even the tamata nods slowly, glass hovering midair. No toast follows this one. Just a moment. You lean back, belly full, thoughts swimming. The stars above you are unapologetically sharp. Someone near the end of the table tries to start a round of clapping and immediately forgets the rhythm. Laughter spreads like wildfire. You join in. Later, the pickled things man will explain the hierarchy of plates to you. Apparently, the kinkali goes in the center, the bread at the edges, and pakali fills the sacred spaces between. You thank him like he's revealed a state secret. He pats your shoulder and says something that probably means you're learning. The tamata stands one last time. To tomorrow, he says, because only fools think tonight can last forever. And yet, no one leaves, no one moves. Because when you're in the middle of a Georgian harvest feast, forever feels entirely possible. The tamata is back on his feet. You'd think by now his toasts would blur together, but somehow each one lands like a well-placed stone in a calm pond, rippling outward, quieting the clatter of forks and the rustle of bread crusts. His voice, low and deliberate, has the kind of authority that doesn't shout. It pulls. You sip your wine reflexively, even though he hasn't raised his glass yet. That's the effect he has. The tamata, or toastmaster, is more than a role. He's part philosopher, part ringmaster, part therapist with a drinking problem. He controls the tempo of the supra with surgical precision. Too fast, and the meaning evaporates. Too slow, and the food goes cold. He knows when to toast to the dead, and when to make a joke about your questionable kinkali technique. And somehow, he always knows exactly when your glass needs refilling, often before you do. His eyebrows move independently. That's the first thing you noticed. One goes up when he's about to challenge someone. The other lowers when he's building up to something sincere. Together, they conduct an entire symphony of expression without a single word. At one point, you swear he communicates with the guy across the table using only eyebrow Morse code and a single nod. They both laugh. You're lost. It doesn't matter. A new toast begins. This one for hospitality. It's elaborate, winding, and involves a metaphor about opening your home like a vineyard gate. At some point, he compares good guests to grapes that don't rot even when the weather turns. You're flattered. You're also a little worried you've just been compared to fungus-resistant produce. Still, you raise your glass with everyone else. The tomato pauses, looks at you, and says something like, "You're new, but you listen well. That's rare." Someone hands you a chunk of roasted meat as a reward. You nod solemnly, now fully inducted into the quiet chaos. You notice how others defer to him without being told. When he speaks, even the children hush. It's not fear, it's rhythm. The supra isn't just a meal, it's a call and response ritual. And he's the caller. The one who remembers the names of distant relatives, the stories of past harvests, the time a lightning bolt struck the walnut tree, and the wine turned out especially good that year. Scientists still argue whether the tomato's role originated from tribal elders, clergy, or bored nobility looking to entertain guests. What they agree on is this: the role hasn't changed much in centuries. In fact, the same skills, public speaking, timing, emotional intelligence, a superhuman liver, are just as necessary now as they were when these feasts were lit by oil lamps and goat bladders instead of LED fairy lights. The man himself barely touches his food. His wine glass stays filled more often than not. It's not about indulgence. He's pacing the emotional flow. For every story about love or family, he drops a line that feels plucked from poetry. One toast ends with, "May your children grow like vines that don't fear the frost." Everyone murmurs in agreement, like they've heard it before and are still surprised it fits. Occasionally, someone challenges him. This is expected. A guest will raise a glass and offer a counter toast. Shorter, usually funnier, sometimes cruder. If it lands, the tomato smiles and grants the floor. If it flops, he'll cover it with a joke and move the feast forward like a magician smoothing a bad card trick. You attempt a toast. You're urged to. It's part of the journey. You stand, your knees wobble. You hold your glass like it's a fragile egg and begin. You mention the beauty of the valley, the warmth of your hosts, the surprising saltiness of Georgian cheese. It's not elegant, but it's heartfelt. The table listens. You finish, unsure if you're about to be applauded or quietly disowned. The tomato raises his eyebrows, both this time, smiles, and says, "Not bad. Next time, sing with it." You sit down, relieved, possibly glowing. At some point, the tomato introduces a toast to contradictions. To life, which is short but feels long. To wine, which is strong but feels soft. To the guest, who arrives a stranger and leaves as kin. He doesn't say much more. No explanation. Just raises his glass. That one sticks. You start to notice that the tomato's job isn't just to keep things moving. It's to create space. For remembrance, for celebration, for reconciliation. At the far end of the table, two older cousins who haven't spoken in years clink glasses after one of his toasts. No fuss. Just quiet agreement, sealed in wine. He toasts again, this time to women, the ones in the kitchen and the ones who aren't. He names grandmothers and daughters one by one, thanking them for hands that shape, for words that guide, for laughter that softens even the hardest men. You catch a few women pretending not to cry. The Tamada doesn't look at them. He just nods, pours, and moves on. As the night deepens, his voice slows, not from fatigue, but like he's adjusting the tempo to match the crickets and the occasional distant bark of a vineyard dog. You've drunk more than you meant to. You've eaten past comfort. But still, the Tamada beckons you into another round, another idea, another gentle truth, wrapped in humor, and half a glass of cha-cha. Eventually, he delivers what seems like the final toast. Something about endurance, about how grapevines suffer to produce sweetness, about how people should too. Everyone drinks. There's a long silence. And then, almost cruelly, he smiles and says, "One more." Everyone groans. Everyone laughs. And the table, like a well-rehearsed orchestra, raises their glasses once more. By now, your sense of time has fermented. Is it midnight? Is it tomorrow? Is this the 4th or 12th toast? You're not sure. But what you do know is that someone just passed you a bowl of something green and squishy, and you're about to eat it while an elderly man next to you tunes a 3-string instrument with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for an appendectomy. Welcome to the musical portion of the Supra, where things get both deeply spiritual and delightfully unhinged. Georgian polyphonic singing, known locally as mruli, doesn't just fill the space, it lifts it. No instruments needed, though someone usually brings out a panduri or chonguri just for flair. But the real magic is in the voices, layered, interwoven, impossible to untangle, like grapevines trained by emotion instead of wire. You hear it begin with 3 men across the table. One starts with a deep, gravelly drone. Another weaves in a higher, mournful thread. The third adds a melody that rises and falls like someone confessing a secret to the stars. You've never heard anything like it. There's no lead singer. There's no rhythm section. It's harmony, but not the clean, tidy kind. It's harmonic chaos with intent. Scientists still argue how this style of polyphony developed, whether it came from pre-Christian ritual chants or simply evolved as a way to communicate across steep mountain valleys. But one thing is certain. When it starts, everyone stops chewing. Even the dogs seem to go quiet. You glance around. Some people have closed their eyes. Others tap their fingers rhythmically on their wine cups. It's hypnotic. The music drags you somewhere else, somewhere above the table, outside of language. You feel it in your chest, low and resonant, like a sonic massage from people who cry in key. When the song ends, it fades slowly, not like applause is expected, but like the silence itself needs a moment to settle back down. Then someone slaps a tambourine on the table, and the mood turns instantly from sacred cathedral to cheerful tavern with poor impulse control. This is when the dancing starts. Georgian dancing is athletic, sharp, and often looks like someone challenged physics to a duel and won. But at the Supra, it's more casual, less about performance, and more about spontaneous joy. A young man kicks his heels into the dirt and spins. A little girl claps along, wearing grape stains like war paint. Someone shouts for a round of kartuli, the romantic partner dance, and 2 teens reluctantly oblige, moving in sync with the kind of awkward grace only future legends possess. Meanwhile, your hands are still full, one with a fried dumpling, the other with what might be a plum or possibly a pickled walnut. Either way, you're not putting anything down. Not yet. You sample the picali, a paste made from minced spinach, beets, or beans, bound with crushed walnuts, garlic, and vinegar. It's shaped into little mounds and topped with pomegranate seeds, like some kind of edible Fabergé sculpture. You have no idea how many you've eaten. Probably 7, possibly more. Across the table, a man in a Soviet-era soccer jersey begins to explain how his family's Sulguni cheese once won second place in a regional competition, but only because the judges were bribed. He doesn't seem bitter, just committed to historical accuracy. Every few minutes, someone pushes a new dish in your direction. Ajap sandali, a smoky eggplant stew. Roasted mushrooms in clay pots. Battered slices of zucchini rolled around a surprise payload of cilantro and nuts. Your brain has filed most of this under delicious mystery. There's a pause in the music, and then a new voice rises. A woman this time, singing a lullaby you don't understand. Her voice is soft, yet it carries. It cuts through the fat in your bloodstream and the fog in your head. Her melody clings to the vineyard air like morning dew. You don't need to translate it. You feel it in your molars. When she finishes, the tamada raises his cup and says something you do catch. To mothers who sing it even when no one listens. A few people nod too hard. A few blink a little too slowly. Someone slides a sword onto the table. You think, surely this is symbolic. It is not. It's part of an old tradition. Sword dances, often performed at festivals, weddings, or whenever the energy needs to spike like a bad blood pressure reading. The sword isn't for eating or fighting. It's for balance. Dancers will spin and balance the blade on their fingertips, shoulders, even teeth, while leaping into the air like caffeinated goats. This time, the sword is passed around for jokes, not performance. One man pretends to knight his friend for services to the breadbasket. Another uses it to dramatically cut through a loaf. You, wisely, just admire from a distance and take another sip of wine. Fun fact: Georgian warriors used to dance before battle, not to intimidate, but to loosen the body and clarify the spirit. It's said a good sword dancer could calm himself before a fight better than any general could with a speech. At this point, everything starts to fold into each other. The music, the wine, the scent of charcoal and coriander. You think someone tried to toast you earlier. You think you may have toasted back. It's hard to say. The children have fallen asleep under the table. A woman sings while picking grapes off the vine behind you. The accordion returns, slightly out of tune, but still triumphant. Someone lights a candle in a hollowed-out pumpkin. Why? No one explains. It just fits. And above all of it, the vines keep swaying, gently, drunkenly, as if they, too, are listening to the songs and stories, drunk on the same air, the same night, the same everything. You wake up, not from sleep, but from a sort of trance. Eyes open, but mind still soaking in wine and song. The feast continues behind you, but now you're walking away from the table, following a crooked path that snakes toward the highlands. Someone says you're headed west, into Imereti. The landscape shifts subtly. The air is thicker here, the hills gentler, greener, quilted with ferns and blackberry brambles. The vines look wilder, less obedient rows, more tangled curls, and unexpected bursts of fruit, like the land is trying to remember how to be a forest again. Here, grapes don't just grow. They escape. A man named Lotto meets you near a sagging fence. He has 2 teeth, 5 dogs, and a jug of something he swears is wine, but might also be fuel. He calls this place the backyard of God, then promptly trips on a rock and curses in 5 dialects. You like him instantly. He gestures toward a sloping vineyard bordered by chestnut trees. This, he says, is Solicuri country. A white grape known for its honeyed finish and mild acidity, Solicuri is Imereti's shy sweetheart. Less famous than Saperavi, less bold than Rakatsitali, but infinitely loyal. The soil here is softer, damp even in the dry season, speckled with limestone and chalk. It holds moisture like secrets. The grapes grow smaller, tighter, as if huddling together for warmth. Luddo explains this valley gets more rain, fewer tourists, and significantly more folk tales about wine-drinking witches. One such story comes as you chew a slice of raw cornmeal cake that tastes oddly like sadness. Lotto says a vine once grew so wild it wrapped around a shepherd's house, whispered secrets to his sheep, and eventually tried to marry his daughter. She declined. The vine withered. Everyone agrees it happened. Scientists still argue whether Imereti's scattered terrain and high humidity make it unsuitable for serious winemaking. Locals disagree, with songs, festivals, and buckets of tvishi, a rare semi-sweet white that tastes like a peach doing taxes. They don't need approval. They have bees. Yes, bees. You're invited to taste bee wine, a strange experimental process where beehives are installed beside fermenting grapes. The bees don't get drunk? Well, probably not, but they apparently contribute airborne yeasts, wild pollen, and vibrational energy. The wine tastes floral, zippy, and faintly judgmental. You're told not to question it. You pass a cluster of Ojaleshi vines. They're deep purple grapes hanging low like ink blots. These are stubborn grapes, high-altitude divas. Some say they thrive only when ignored. One grower claims his vines started producing better yields after he stopped complimenting them. You don't ask follow-ups. Here, winemaking is less about stainless steel tanks and more about inherited chaos. The cellars are carved into the earth. The floors are sticky. The walls are uneven. But there's pride, always. A young woman pulls you into her family's Marani wine cellar to show off her clay jugs. These were my grandfather's, she says, and the wine inside is mostly edible. You smile, you drink. You try not to think about what mostly might mean. The feast here is quieter than in Kakheti. Smaller tables, fewer toasts, but still rich. You eat elergy, a cornmeal and cheese concoction that stretches like pizza and feels like a warm hug from someone named Nana. There's fried river fish served with tarragon vinegar, and sour plum sauce so tart your jaw contracts involuntarily. A local boy offers you a glass of chikurtma, a thick, eggy chicken soup, traditionally consumed the morning after excessive wine. It's lemony, creamy, and tastes like a hangover apology letter. You're not even hungover yet, but you drink it preemptively. At some point, you're taken to see the wild vines, ancient, untrained grapevines that crawl through the forest like green tentacles. Some are over 100 years old, with trunks thicker than your thigh. This one, a guide whispers, has seen war, famine, and the invention of electricity. You pat it gently. It seems unimpressed. You climb a little higher, the air cooler now. The views open up into a wide sweep of green hills, crumbling fortresses, and villages arranged like spilled breadcrumbs. You sit on a stone wall, sipping wine from a repurposed yogurt cup, watching the clouds roll in. In the distance, thunder mumbles like an old man warning the sky not to show off too much. Someone beside you starts humming. It turns into a full song, low, melodic, about a lost grape harvest and a saint who turned tears into vinegar. You don't know the words, but you hum along anyway. There's a peace to this part of the world. Not silence, exactly, but a gentler noise, less performance, more breath. You start to wonder if the wild grapes remember things the cultivated ones forget, if they carry ancient arguments in their skins, if their wines taste like myths we're too rational to believe. A butterfly lands on your glass. You drink anyway. Later, back at the house, Lotto insists you try his special batch. It's stored in a recycled Coca-Cola bottle and smells like regret. You drink. You survive. Barely. The feast returns. A small Supra with plastic chairs, a dog under the table, and a bowl of pickled John Holy that might actually be a prank. Someone raises a toast to the wild things, the grapes, the stories, the people. And as the night closes in, you realize the wild vines may not produce the most perfect wine, but they never pretend to. It's early morning, but no one tells the kitchen that. The coals are already lit. A pile of garlic stems smolders near the doorway, and someone is pounding dough like it insulted their mother. You've barely wiped the dreams from your eyes, and yet the air smells of herbs, firewood, and sharp decisions. Welcome to the command center, the Georgian kitchen. Here, in the grape-growing valleys, men might pour the wine and make the toasts, but the women, they build the feast, literally. From sunrise to well past the final toast, they cook, stir, slice, and whisper their judgment into every dish. Not loud, not flashy, just constant, effortless control. You step into the back room to offer help and are immediately handed a knife the size of your forearm and a squash with no clear instructions. You peel in fear. The table beside you is dusted in flour. A woman with gray braids moves silently between stations, kneading dough, checking on beans, occasionally yelling into the yard for someone named Georgie to stop chasing the rooster. You learn her name is Nino. She has been in charge of this kitchen since before you were born. She takes your squash, nods once, and says, "Not bad for a tourist." You're honored. Khachapuri dough is being shaped nearby. The Emiratian version today, round, filled with cheese, pinched at the edges like a lazy sun. Across the room, two girls are cracking walnuts with alarming efficiency, dumping them into a bowl where they'll be ground with garlic and vinegar to make bhaj, a sauce so creamy it might ruin you for all other sauces. Over in the corner, a large pot bubbles ominously. That's chikirtma, Nino explains. Cure for everything, except heartbreak. For that, you need karcho. You ask what's in it. She shrugs. Chicken, lemon, a little magic. Someone starts slicing cucumbers and tomatoes. Another person picks herbs from a basket, like a pianist selecting notes. There's coriander, basil, parsley, tarragon, and something you don't recognize but smells faintly of lemon and defiance. Georgian salads don't come with dressings, just salt, oil, and the sharpness of someone who's seen too much. You peek into the pantry. It's part root cellar, part apothecary, part chaos. There are jars of fermented garlic, tubs of pickled green tomatoes, strings of dried peppers, and church keela hanging like beaded necklaces. There's also a stack of bricks on which a cast iron pot rests. You're told it hasn't moved since 1986. Why should it? It works. Scientists still argue whether the flavor of Georgian food comes more from its ingredients or its technique. But in this kitchen, the technique is mostly taste it until it's right, and the ingredients are grown within sight of the stove. You watch as one woman makes lobio, a rich red bean stew, by layering beans, herbs, vinegar, and just a hint of crushed plum. No measuring cups, no timers, just muscle memory passed down like a lullaby. You're ushered outside, where a man is slowly turning a metal spit over open coals. This is mitzvati, skewered pork marinated in wine and onions. He brushes it with a branch of tarragon dipped in oil. It crackles. You immediately want to eat 12. He offers you one early piece. Quality control, he winks. You burn your mouth and pretend it was worth it. Nearby, a younger woman tends to tonis puri, the signature bread of Georgia, baked inside a deep circular clay oven called a tone. She slaps the dough onto the walls with terrifying speed. It bakes in minutes, the outside blistered, the inside airy. She tears off a piece and hands it to you wrapped in a towel. It is, no exaggeration, the most comforting thing you've ever held. Behind the shed, a grandmother is making tklapi, fruit leather, by spreading pureed plums onto cloth-covered boards and letting them dry under the sun. Snack for winter, she says. She doesn't stop working as she speaks. You wonder if she was born stirring. A small child runs by with an entire cucumber in one hand and a ladle in the other. No one stops him. You're told to sit, not because your help is no longer needed, but because your usefulness has expired. The food is nearly done, and now you're in the way. You take your seat beneath the grape arbor. The vines above are heavy with fruit, casting dappled shadows on the table, now freshly dressed in white linen. The plates arrive, one by one, like honored guests. Stews, sauces, breads, cheeses, pickles, more stews, more bread. Something that might be a dumpling and might be a pocket of hot cheese lies. You don't question. You accept. The tamada appears, nodding at the kitchen, like a general saluting his fiercest battalion. He doesn't need to say anything. Everyone knows who made the feast happen. A toast is raised to the women who feed us, who teach us, who make men useful by giving them mouths to fill. Laughter erupts. Someone claps too hard and knocks over a bowl of eggplant. No one minds. And as you chew your fourth variation of walnut garlic paste, you realize the food tastes like the hands that made it. Weathered, practiced, quietly brilliant. There's no restaurant that could serve you this, because this isn't cuisine. It's memory in motion. By the time night settles over the hills again, the lines between food and story, song and silence, guest and ghost begin to blur. You're no longer just attending a harvest. You're inhabiting a myth that reshapes itself each evening. And in the grape-growing valleys of Georgia, myths come with footnotes, wine refills, and sometimes a side of suspiciously animated folklore. It starts innocently enough. An old man with a mustache that could shelter small animals begins a tale between toasts. Something about a shepherd who fell in love with the moon. But before you can ask what happens next, someone counters with a better story about a vineyard guarded by saints who only appear during harvest, cloaked in fog and chewing sour plums. And then another chimes in with a darker tale, a hidden spring under a monastery, where those who drink the water dream only of war or goats. It's not just drunken rambling. This valley, like much of Georgia, is thick with folk legends passed down as casually as bread. They seep into everyday conversation. They cling to the walls of wine cellars. They're the reason people throw the last sip of wine to the earth. For the ancestors, they say, or maybe, so the soil remembers us kindly. Tonight, as the embers from dinner cool and the shadows lengthen, the stories lean a little closer to the edge of belief. You're told about drunken shepherds, real or imagined, who wander the hills during harvest and sometimes vanish for weeks, only to return with new songs and impossible tales. One supposedly came back with a recipe for pakali given to him by a talking bear. A very polite bear, your host insists. He wore a hat. You laugh, but they don't. Another guest recounts the tale of St. George's wine spring, where a wounded knight once rested under a vineyard and cried so many tears that the vines fermented his sorrow into the first rose. Is it real? Unlikely. But a bottle with a similar label does sit on the table. You drink it. It tastes like strawberries and unresolved emotion. Then someone mentions the Sulliveras Cavey, the cursed ravine where grape pickers claim to hear voices when they harvest too late at night, a place so dense with spiritual noise that even dogs refuse to bark there. One woman says her cousin went to harvest alone once and came back speaking in riddles and planting vines in perfect spirals. She gestures vaguely toward a distant hill. There, she says, where the mist likes to sit. You look. You see nothing. But the hair on your arms prickles anyway. Scientists still argue whether these legends are distorted memories of ancient migrations or simply coping mechanisms for agricultural uncertainty. Either way, you're not walking through that ravine without a flashlight and possibly a priest. A new voice cuts in, soft, deliberate. An older woman begins a lullaby-like story about the vineyard angel, a silent figure in white said to walk between rows of vines at dawn, brushing dew from the grapes with her sleeves. No one has ever seen her face. Those who do are said to dream of distant futures or forget their own names for a day. She only appears, the woman whispers, when the harvest is good, but the hearts are heavy. You glance at the full baskets lining the edges of the yard. You glance at your own glass. Full. Someone opens a dusty book of poems. Another fiddles with a carved walking stick said to belong to the last honest vintner. A teenager shows you a TikTok of a cat stealing a church keela string. The magic of Georgia is that all of this coexists. Even the architecture speaks in riddles. In some villages, vineyards are planted around ancient chapels, tiny stone buildings that look half swallowed by time and moss. To remind us, your host says, that wine was holy before it was happy. You learn that monks once made wine in secret during the Soviet era, burying kvaveris beneath outhouses and disguising fermentation smells with goat pens. This wasn't just survival. It was faith in liquid form. Later, when you wander through a crumbling garden, you find a half-toppled statue of a man holding a grape cluster in one hand and a sword in the other. No plaque, no explanation. Just silent, vine-strangled power. You ask someone who it is. Nobody knows, they shrug. Maybe someone important. Maybe just very thirsty. And then there's the grape that screams. A varietal, grown in tiny amounts on one misty slope, rumored to emit a faint squeal when plucked at the wrong time. Of course, you ask if this is true. Only if the harvesters are rude, comes the answer. The sky turns black velvet. Fireflies flicker like unreliable lanterns. A breeze curls around the courtyard like it's eavesdropping. Someone brings out a wooden bowl of tatara, warm, gooey grape, must thickened into a pudding and eaten by the spoonful. You're told it's best enjoyed while listening to ghost stories. So naturally, more are shared. A woman tells of her grandmother who never drank wine, but poured a drop every day onto a stone outside her kitchen. When she died, the stone cracked in half, revealing a perfectly preserved grape leaf. They still use it to garnish lobio. You look at your plate. You push it gently aside. Someone toasts to those who watch us drink. Everyone raises their glass. No one specifies who those are. And just when you think it's time to head to bed, someone points toward the horizon, where the hills rise like sleeping giants. They say if you listen closely, they whisper, you can hear the vines dreaming. You listen, and maybe, just maybe, you do. Beneath the quiet stone bulk of the Alaverdi Monastery, morning drips slowly through the vines like thick honey. You step carefully, following your guide down a narrow path carved by centuries of sandal prints and prayers. Ahead looms a low arched doorway that leads to a dark, cool chamber, the monastery cellar, a place where wine doesn't age, it contemplates. Inside, the temperature drops 10 degrees. The air smells like damp stone, wax, and sweet decay. It's comforting, in a cryptic way. You trail behind a monk, with the posture of someone who spent most of his adult life bowing, lifting, or stirring. His robes swish gently against the floor, and his voice is so soft you lean forward instinctively, like you're listening to a confession. He doesn't say much at first, just gestures to the buried clay cuvevres nestled into the cellar floor like forgotten tombstones. There are maybe a dozen here, all sealed with round, flat stones and beeswax. No labels, no fuss, just quiet guardians of slowly fermenting wine. Here, he says, placing a hand on one vessel, the grapes become silent. You wait for more. He shrugs. Until they speak again. You have questions. He moves on. The monk lights a single candle. It flickers across walls grooved with old tool marks. The ceiling curves low, built centuries ago with bricks that have held both moisture and memory longer than most empires have lasted. In the far corner, a wooden ladder leads up into what he calls the soul chamber. You're told this is where the monks pray during the first fermentation, so that the wine might be less angry. Scientists still argue whether the microflora of monastery cellars, yeasts, spores, mysterious white fuzz, is more diverse than in commercial wineries. The monks don't care. It's not about control, the monk says. It's about listening. You follow him deeper. In a back alcove, he lifts a cloth covering an ancient stone basin. Inside is grape must, thick and bubbling like a potion. The scent is warm, sharp, almost alive. This will become kikvi, he says. A wine we bottle with no label, no plan, just patience. He pours a small amount into a wooden ladle and offers it to you. You sip. It's halfway between juice and alcohol, sweet, heady, with a hint of clove, and something else you can't name. It clings to your tongue like a vow. The cellar isn't just a storage room, it's a reliquary, and above it, the monastery hums with quiet purpose. Built over 1,000 years ago, Alaverdi was once the highest cathedral in Georgia, home to both saints and sinners. The monks grew wine here even during Soviet rule, disguising it as vinegar or ritual fluid. You wonder how many bottles were hidden behind false walls, tucked inside hollow columns, or buried in gardens. marked only by cryptic grapevines. There's a rumor, told in hushed voices over evening bread, that one kvevari has been fermenting for 20 years, untouched, except by candlelight and the occasional whispered psalm. You ask to see it. The monk raises an eyebrow. Not for tourists, he says, not even for saints. Outside, the sun is rising slowly, spilling gold over the vineyards. Chickens wander between the rows, picking at unseen treasures. A black cat slinks past, tail held high like a musical note. The world begins to wake. Back at the monastery's courtyard, you sit beside an ancient fig tree, its branches held up by wooden crutches. A nun brings you a plate of bread and cheese. The bread is warm. The cheese smells like courage. She pours you a clay cup of the monastery's amber wine, a deep, tannic liquid made from white grapes fermented with their skins. It tastes like apricots left too long in the sun, like old gold that's learned humility. Some wines, the nun says, are not for pleasure. They're for remembering. You nod, unsure what exactly you're remembering, but sure it matters. She tells you about fungal terroir, the invisible layers of life that live in the cellar walls, the tools, the cracks in the cadaverous. Some say it's these fungi that make monastery wines taste different, more grounded, less eager. They slow the wine down, she says, so it doesn't forget its place. As you sit quietly, sipping, a bell tolls above you. Not loud, just a soft, deliberate chime that vibrates through your bones. It marks the hour, yes, but also something else, a transition, from mourning to meaning, from taste to reflection. You glance back toward the cellar. The monk is still down there, muttering over a sealed jar, occasionally tapping it with a wooden spoon, like he's encouraging it to stay hopeful. The courtyard smells like basil and hot stone. A breeze rustles the vines growing up the ancient walls. You hear a rooster shout something unintelligible. The nun sighs. Even the grapes, she says, must answer to silence sometimes. And just like that, the monastery lets you go. Not with ceremony, just a final cup of wine and a door left open. You walk back down the path, past the fig tree, past the vines, and toward the open road. The sun is higher now, the light sharper. But you carry a bit of cellar shadow with you, still cool, still humming. And somewhere in your chest, something continues to ferment. You're on the move again, feet crunching over gravel, past stone walls and crooked fences that whisper secrets in the wind. But this time, the vineyard rows have given way to something stranger. Flat fields where the vines are uniform, mechanical, almost too orderly. You've stumbled into the past, but not the ancient kind. This is Soviet land now, or at least it used to be. The collectivized vineyards of Georgia's Soviet era stretch across the landscape like scars half-healed. Uniformity was the goal back then. Rows planted by state decree, harvest quotas enforced with clipboards and megaphones. No wild grapes here, no spontaneous singing, just grapes that served the state before they served the table. Your guide, a man named Dato, who insists on wearing aviator sunglasses indoors and out, waves an arm at the horizon. Back then, he says, we made wine by the tanker. You picture vast stainless steel drums filled with liquid compliance. Dato grins. It tasted like floor cleaner, with a hint of nationalism. You walk past an old factory building, its windows long gone, vines reclaiming the concrete like an overdue revolution. Inside, Rusted conveyor belts and bent metal vats sit in eerie silence. A faded propaganda poster still clings to one wall. A woman with grape clusters in both hands, smiling like she knows the camera will report her to the party if she doesn't. Scientists still argue whether collectivized agriculture permanently altered Georgia's soil composition. But the people who lived through it mostly argue about the hangovers. Dato tells you his father worked one of these vineyards. Woke up at 5, came home at midnight, purple hands, purple shoes, purple dreams, got paid in coupons for vinegar and salami. You ask how the wine tasted. He shrugs. Didn't matter. It was wine. Yet even within this system, secret vintners persisted. Families buried Kavavris in backyard gardens and pretended they were septic tanks. Some monks disguised their fermentation spaces as chicken coops. Others smuggled yeast in old socks. If you got caught, Dato says, you'd lose your job or get promoted, depending on who caught you. There were rumors of underground feasts, literal and figurative. In cellars with blackout curtains and soundproof doors, villagers would hold clandestine supras, toasting freedom, family, and fermentation under the very noses of the commissars. My uncle, Dato says, once toasted to Stalin's mustache falling into a wine press. Everyone laughed until the lights flickered. The wine of that era was often rushed, watered down, or bulk blended for export. But the toasts got sharper. Irony flourished. Allegory became a survival skill. A man might raise a glass to the firm vines and soft earth, while his comrades nodded, knowing full well he meant the resistance. One winery, long since shuttered, still stands as a relic of that era. The gates creak open as you approach, revealing rusted barrels and faded chalk marks that once measured acidity and loyalty in equal measure. A pigeon flies overhead. A loose vine has crept through a broken window and rooted itself inside the bottling room. You take that as a sign of victory. And yet, beneath the grim grayness, you find odd moments of humanity. A handwritten label tucked behind a radiator reads, Mother's Reserve, 1982. A corked bottle wrapped in newspaper sits inside a box marked Q for wedding or revolution. You imagine someone sneaking sips between shifts, dreaming of a day when wine could mean more than production numbers. Dato pulls a bottle from his coat. Not Soviet, he assures you. This is my grandfather's blend, made in secret, aged in defiance. He pops the cork. The scent is musky, earthy, and a little rebellious. You drink. It tastes like hope, mold, and stubbornness. In a good way. Back in the village, you pass a small museum where Soviet wine awards are displayed alongside confiscated stills and a scale model of a collectivized vineyard. There's a diorama of a 1970s Supra, plastic figures frozen mid-toast, their tiny hands raised in plaster solidarity. A placard explains that communal meals were encouraged, but the content of toasts was monitored heavily. One story claims a man was arrested for raising a glass to grapes that grow sideways. No one knows what he meant. Everyone assumes it was seditious. You walk through a corridor of wine labels from the 60s, all block letters and stern geometry. No smiling grapes, no rolling hills, just labels that say, basically, drink this, you're welcome. And yet, beneath the gray, the real story kept fermenting. Dato points to one with a cracked red star. My grandfather said it was the worst wine he ever made. You ask why he bottled it. Because he wanted proof, Dato says. that even bad years deserve to be remembered. The idea sticks with you. Later that evening, you return to a small courtyard, lit by string lights and warmed by charcoal. Someone brings out homemade wine in a reused soda bottle, again. The label reads Saperavi 2024, but someone's drawn a smiley face on the cap. A toast is raised, not to revolution or resistance, but to resilience, to the vines that didn't forget how to twist, to the songs that kept getting sung, to the wine that remembered how to be itself. And as you sip, you realize this too is a kind of harvest, one not measured in liters, but in memory. You wake slowly, unsure if it's dawn, or just the glow of pickled things still fermenting in your bloodstream. The bed beneath you is creaky. The blanket smells faintly of vineyard dust and chamomile. And outside the window, roosters. Again, of course. Your brain protests as you sit up. Your legs are made of bread, your head of wine fog and loose regret. And still, the feast marches on. Not with fanfare this time, but with the stealth of a hangover cure passed down through generations. Someone knocks, doesn't wait for an answer, and enters, carrying a bowl of steaming liquid. Eat, they say, placing it on your lap like a hot, heavy threat. It's kash, the infamous Georgian hangover stew. Boiled cow feet, garlic, salt, and more garlic. The kind of dish that offends 3 senses, but repairs 1 soul. You hesitate. They watch. You eat. It tastes like gelatinous honesty and basement confessions. It's strangely soothing. You're told to chase it with raw garlic cloves dipped in vinegar. You comply. Your body protests. Your spirit rises. You wander into the kitchen, where 3 women are already prepping lunch. One of them looks at you and simply says, "You're pale. Sit." A cup of mountain herbal tea is pushed into your hand. It smells like thyme, marigold, and stubborn optimism. You sip. Your stomach makes a sound that might be applause. There's also pickled everything. Green tomatoes, jonjoli blossoms, garlic stems, cucumbers, even plums. They offer you one. You bite. Your eyes water. Your sinuses clear. You forgive your past self. Hangovers, you learn, are not considered weaknesses here. They're earned battle wounds, treated with the same care as bee stings and heartbreak. Someone hands you a plate of lobiani, a bean-stuffed bread folded like an envelope. You bite into it and feel your internal organs begin negotiations. Outside, the yard is already bustling again. A few guests from last night's supra are still lingering. One man appears to be sleeping upright in a chair, holding a half-eaten peach. Another is singing softly to a cat. No one interrupts either. You pass a table where 3 older men are sipping matsoni, a tart fermented yogurt served cold, and debating which year produced the best saperavi. One says 1998. Another swears by 2011. The third just shrugs and says, "Every year I survived is a good one." You toast to that with a cup of tea. Later, someone suggests a walk to clear the wine ghosts. You follow a narrow footpath out of the village, past a crumbling wall with grapevines growing right through it. Like time forgot who owned what. You hear bees, roosters, distant folk songs, and your own heartbeat returning to normal. The air smells different here. Less of food, more of dust, sage, and warmed stone. A horse watches you from a distance. You wave. It blinks. Mutual respect. As you climb a gentle hill, your guide points out patches of wild herbs. "This one," he says, plucking a sprig, "for digestion. That one, for luck in marriage, and this. He pauses at a bitter-smelling plant. For when you've had too much cha-cha and need to forget your name. You pocket it, just in case. At the top of the hill, a stone bench overlooks the valley. You sit. Below, rows of vineyards stretch out in lazy lines, the morning haze still clinging like a silk scarf over the hills. You realize that hangovers here aren't obstacles. They're part of the rhythm, like a sigh between songs. Your guide pulls out a tiny bottle of something clear. You eye it with suspicion. He grins. Hair of the grape. It's cha-cha, of course. Grape pomace brandy. This batch smells like regret and pepper. You clink cups. You drink. You make a face that's probably illegal in 5 countries. And then, strangely, you feel better. Scientists still argue whether small doses of alcohol can help ease hangover symptoms. Georgians don't argue. They just do it. You descend the hill, feeling more yourself, or perhaps just a slightly shinier version. Back in the yard, someone's frying potatoes with dill. A young boy is slicing tomatoes with a knife that looks older than his parents'. There's music again, soft, scratchy, drifting from an ancient speaker tied to a tree branch with twine. Lunch is not formal, just a low table, some mismatched chairs, bowls of leftovers, and a large jug labeled "Trust Me." You trust. You sip. It's lighter than last night's wine, infused with herbs and a bit of sparkle. Like the winemaker was trying to apologize for your headache. Someone raises a toast. Not the tomata this time, just a neighbor passing through. To second chances, he says, and to the fact that wine always remembers, but never holds a grudge. Everyone drinks, even the cat. You lie down beneath a fig tree, full again, both in body and in spirit. The breeze carries the scent of smoke, mint, and roasted garlic. You close your eyes, and as the vines above sway gently in the wind, you wonder, maybe this is what healing smells like. There's a certain pace to post-harvest life in the Georgian valleys. Slow, dusty, suspiciously well-informed. You find yourself walking down a dirt lane flanked by grape arbors, their leaves now tinged with yellow, like they've spent too much time thinking. The air is warmer than expected, with a tang of wood smoke and drying fruit. Everywhere you go, someone's ready to feed you, toast you, or tell you something you absolutely didn't ask to know. Welcome to village gossip, the lifeblood of the grape-growing season, and arguably more fermented than the wine. You stop at a gate strung with corn cobs, drying like golden lanterns. An old woman in a floral housecoat eyes you from her porch, then calls out, "You're the guest who choked on the pakali, yes?" You nod, embarrassed. She waves you inside anyway. There's coffee, there's bread, there's judgment, but also jam. Inside, the radio plays quietly, an old folk song about a widow who falls in love with a winemaker and turns into a vineyard. You pretend not to cry. Your host slices figs and tells you about her neighbor, who swears she can hear her vines talk. But only when she's angry, she adds. Georgian villages are tangled like vines themselves. Names, families, feuds, and friendships all crisscrossed through generations. You visit a small shop to buy soap and leave knowing who's getting married next month, whose dog ran away again, and which family secretly uses store-bought vinegar. Scandalous. A man on a bench greets you with a glass of wine and a whispered warning. Don't trust the tomatoes from over the ridge. They're too red. It's unnatural. You sip politely. He nods like he's done you a great favor. The village is full of these encounters. A woman points out a home where the tamata cried once in 1994. A child tells you about a rooster who attacks only tourists. You look down. Your shoes are dusty. You walk faster. Gossip here doesn't sting. It ferments. It's shared like bread, offered with a shrug and a smirk. Even the harshest story comes with a spoonful of plum jam and a gentle, but don't repeat that. You pass a man fixing a gate. He offers you church kila, the grape and nut candy, and casually mentions that his cousin once aged wine in a hollowed-out watermelon. It worked, he says, but we lost the recipe and possibly a tooth, huh? Further on, you find a courtyard where 5 generations live under one grapevine. Literally. The vine climbs across the rooftop, casting shadows on everything below. Children chase chickens. Grandparents argue about toasting order. In the corner, a young woman stirs grape must with one hand and texts with the other. Balance. Someone hands you a plate of roasted eggplant. Another offers pickled jonjoli. A boy brings you a kitten. You have no free hands. No one cares. This is how the valley speaks. Through gestures, snacks, and unsolicited opinions about how your hat fits. You're taken to a neighbor's house just to see the view. The view is nice, but the real reason becomes clear when a bottle appears. Then another. A toast follows. Then a correction to your pronunciation of Kinkali. Then an entire lesson on local dialects. You nod a lot. At one point, someone asks where you're from. You answer. They respond, "Ah, we had a tractor from there once. It was cursed." You don't ask for clarification. Scientists still argue whether close-knit rural communities produce healthier social bonds or just more inventive arguments. In Georgia, it's both. Every hill has a history. Every dinner has a footnote. You're taken to meet a local beekeeper. She shows you her hives, her bruised fingers, her favorite spoon. She gives you honey so fresh it still trembles and whispers, "Don't trust anyone who says wine is enough. You also need bees." A neighbor leans over the fence to ask if you've seen the moon tonight. "It's full," he says, which means the grapes are restless. You look up. He's right. It's too full. Like a lantern about to burst, you sit beneath a pear tree in the village square. Around you, the day winds down. Smoke rises from chimneys. Goats wander home. Someone plays a soft tune on a battered accordion. You don't recognize the song, but you've heard the mood before. A woman passing by stops, hands you a grape leaf stuffed with rice, and says, "The harvest was good, but don't tell the sky, it gets jealous." You chew thoughtfully. The stories linger long after the people leave. You find yourself remembering odd fragments. A man who claimed his vines grew faster when he cursed at them in Russian. A girl who claimed to know which wines caused which dreams. A grandmother who told you, "Everything you need to know is in the kitchen, or the soil, or my purse." The purse was empty. The wisdom wasn't. Later that evening, as you return to your host's house, someone shouts your name. Not perfectly, but close enough. A wave, a smile. "You're one of us now," they say. "You'll never be mysterious again." And somehow, you're okay with that. Somehow, after all these toasts and tales, after the pickles and ghosts and grandmothers who can outchop a blender, you're still here. You've made it to the end of harvest season, though "end" is a generous term. In Georgia, Nothing ever really ends. It just loops, softer, slower, with a different song. The vines are thinning now. The baskets are mostly empty. The bees have quieted. You walk into the vineyard and feel the shift. The grapes that remain hang like whispers, small, shriveled, almost apologetic. The leaves have turned, all burnished copper and sleepy green. You touch one. It crumbles like paper. And yet, from a distance, there's movement. A small group is gathering under a walnut tree. They're setting the table again. You smile. You sit. It's the last toast of the season, or so they say. No tablecloth this time. Just wood and elbows and stories. Fewer dishes, more toasts. The food is simpler. Grilled corn, leftover elargi, the kind of wine that's been open for a while but still insists it's charming. The tamata is back, but looser now. His voice is lower, like he's tuning down an instrument for a lullaby. He raises his glass. To what we planted, to what we picked, to what we forgot. Everyone drinks. Then someone else rises. To the jokes we told too many times. Laughter. Another chimes in. To the vines that didn't fruit, but tried anyway. A quiet nod. And then someone proposes what they call the toast with no words. They raise their glass and say nothing. Just look around. At the soil on their boots. At the crumbs on the table. At the empty chair someone forgot to fill. Everyone joins in silently. The clink of glasses feels louder than any speech. You eat slowly. The food tastes different now, like it knows it's the last act. Even the bread is more thoughtful. The sky is doing that late October thing where it turns silver just before sunset. A light mist begins to crawl down from the mountains, threading between trees and homes like it's searching for something it left behind. You shiver a little. Someone passes you a sweater without asking. Scientists still argue whether wine tastes better when shared or when earned. Georgian villagers would say both, but especially when you're tired. The music tonight is softer. No dancing. Just a guitar. Some quiet humming. A woman sings a lullaby for no one in particular. The youngest children are asleep. The oldest guests lean into their elbows like they're listening to the ground think. Someone brings out a bowl of roasted chestnuts and says, "Winter will be long, but we are fat with stories." The group nods. No one argues. You excuse yourself for a moment and walk to the edge of the vineyard. The vines look bare, yes, but not dead. They're preparing, resting, planning. Grapevines don't die in winter. They retreat. Underground, they gather strength. Like stories between feasts, you crouch and touch the soil. It's cool now, but not cold, not yet. Behind you, a voice calls out. One more. You turn. Everyone's holding their glasses again. Eyes sleepy. Smiles easy. Even the tamata looks a little amused by his own inability to stop. To the guest, someone says, who came late, stayed long, and will be remembered by the vines. You raise your glass. You drink. You think that's it. It isn't. Another toast. To the year, whatever kind of beast it was. And another. To the people who couldn't join us, but did anyway. You lose track. No one minds. This is a celebration of stillness now, of breathing, of quiet. The feast is no longer about food or even wine. It's about the thing underneath it all. The stillness after abundance. Eventually, Someone begins clearing the table, slowly, gently, as if waking it from a dream. You help. You carry dishes. You fold the napkins. You say goodnight too many times. You are hugged by people whose names you still barely pronounce. They don't care. You're theirs now. As you leave the courtyard, the vines rustle once, just once, as if sighing. Tomorrow they'll sleep, but tonight they toast you goodbye. By now, the valley breathes slower. You walk out in the early morning, just as the mist hovers low, like a tired shawl, over the vineyard rows. The sun isn't up yet, but the light has started to soften the darkness, blurring stone walls, grape trellises, and the crooked silhouette of a fig tree into one slow watercolor sigh. The harvest is done. Not just the picking and the pressing, but the singing, the feeding, the laughing until you choke on walnut paste. All of it has gently faded into the earth, like compost that knows how to sing lullabies. You pass the same vineyards you stumbled through days ago, now still, solemn, almost shy. The vines are bare, just wiry stems curling like old fingers toward the sky. You touch one. It doesn't recoil. It simply rests. Down the hill, smoke curls from a chimney. A quiet breakfast has begun. No feasting, no toasts. Just bread, soft cheese, maybe a little plum jam. The kind of meal where no one speaks unless spoken to. And even then, only in half sentences. You sit, sip warm milk tea with herbs. No cha-cha, no wine, not today. Outside, the last leaves are falling, drifting in slow, aimless spirals. A child gathers them in a basket, not to play, but to burn gently later, so the smoke keeps the spirits company. That's what her grandmother says anyway. In the background, you hear a soft sound, like a kveivri lid being lifted. The wine is stirring, just barely. It murmurs under the earth, like a bear yawning in its den. Still fermenting, still remembering. Scientists still argue what makes a wine truly Georgian. Is it the grape, the method, the place? But anyone who stood in a kitchen as flour dusted the sunlight, or sat through a toast so long you forgot your own name knows. It's the waiting. The patient rhythm of picking, pressing, pouring, pausing. Someone walks by, carrying a basket of walnut shells in quietness. She smiles. You smile back. No words needed. Everything's been said. You walk the same path you came in on, but now it feels different. Not an exit, a return. You notice things now that were too loud before. A cracked bowl mended with copper wire. A wine jug used as a flower pot. A rooster no longer shouting, but watching, curious. The background noise of the village is now just breath and wood smoke. Even the accordion is sleeping. You sit beneath the grape arbor one last time. It's empty above you, all the leaves gone. But the lattice still holds its shape, like a memory waiting for spring. Someone brings you a cup of pelamushi, grape pudding, cold and thick, speckled with walnuts. You take a bite. It tastes like the final word of a poem. And then comes the wind down. So now, dear traveler, let the vines go silent. Let the feast fade into the softness of memory, into a dream where grapes never overripen, where bread is always warm, and the tomato's voice still echoes gently between your ears. Let the soil rest. Let your belly unclench. Let the cuvevris keep their secrets under cool stone and waxy lids. There's nothing left to pick, nothing more to toast. The vines have withdrawn, curling inward like stories, told too often, now curling up for sleep. The songs have ended, but the harmonies still hover in the mist. You may hear them, just faintly, if you listen past the wind. Or maybe it's just your own breath slowing. The kitchen fires have dimmed, leaving behind only ash and the scent of last night's stew. The laughter is now folded up with the linens. The dancing shoes have been put away, not cleaned, but left dusty, as if they'll be needed again soon. And they will, because the valley never forgets. It merely pauses. So close your eyes, friend of the harvest. Let the stories ferment. Let the stillness settle over you like a soft wool blanket. Tomorrow, the vines will dream, but tonight, you sleep.